What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So Riot released a blog post a while back where they were announcing that Season 7 would be kicking off a month earlier than expected. But they also gave two interesting bits of information in that same post. Firstly, they were testing the ability to exclude one role when queuing into ranked, so now you'll be able to choose fill with the exception of one role. You could choose fill except for support, for example. The second thing they also mentioned was the plan to retire the normal draft game mode, which is actually quite an interesting topic that's sort of flying under the rug a little bit that I definitely wanted to talk about. And if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button and let's get started. So the initial post from Riot Socrates stated that normal draft was going to be retired during preseason for all regions with the exception of North America, Western Europe, and Brazil. So the idea here is that matchmaking is still causing problems, and splitting up players into so many different game modes is just diluting the player base a little bit too much. So by removing normal draft in regions where it had lower participation, Riot's hoping that it's going to make all of the other queues just be healthier in general. And they actually went as far as to say that they would ideally like to disable normal draft in every region, including North America, Europe West, and Brazil eventually. So they're clearly definitely not happy with normal draft right now, with it taking players away from flex queue, which has definitely had its own fair share of issues since its release. The removal of normal draft was made because the participation on that queue on the affected servers that it got removed on was honestly just too low. And since they're releasing the new version of dynamic queue, flex queue, they wanted to take away the normal draft mode, since then those players that enjoy that sort of draft format are just going to go play ranked flex instead. In turn, that should mean instead of a ton of low quality queues, you maybe have one really nice, super quality, very healthy queue where you wouldn't have a problem finding well matched games. But this is a server by server solution though. It's definitely not set in stone that every server is going to have the same queue system or same dynamics of their queue system. Whatever best suits the player base for each server is going to decide what kinds of queues are available. Now, a lot of players that heard about this were pretty upset to hear that Riot wanted to take away normal draft from the bigger servers as well, since the population across every game mode is honestly kind of fine for those servers as it is right now. So really, it would be more just like taking away the sort of like ranked practice game mode away, which would probably not be that well received by most people. So Riot Draggles followed up on the post as well, actually, to clarify that Riot has no plans to disable normal draft on the more highly populated servers, in this case North America, EU West, and Brazil, but he did also mention that they would like to take what they call the best aspects of both normal draft and blind pick and potentially merge them into a single queue eventually. Riot Ghostcrawler said this new normal mode queue would probably include the new position selection from ranked as well, so essentially they want to do something that's like the best of both worlds of all the different modes. So they have something that's strictly just one queue for normal games and one queue for ranked games. Or I guess two ranked queues if you count solo queue, but they do play on the same system, so I don't know if you could necessarily count them. Now that probably means that the new normal mode's gonna let you pick a role or fill, and then once you were in a game you'd blind pick your heroes, maybe you get bans like you would in normal draft, although that does sound like it could be a fair compromise for low population servers. The reasoning that those regions don't play normal draft is kind of interesting. We don't necessarily have the statistics, so of course we can't say for sure about the other regions, but it's generally accepted that normal draft is like the ranked substitute. It's like where you go if you want to practice your new hero, practice for ranked, where you can play a pretty competitive game or a competitive format at least without worrying about your rank, or maybe you try out a new playstyle or with different ranked pre-mades or something that maybe you couldn't play flex queue with. So it's hard to say that removing it would have a direct effect on improving the overall queue times for players. Queue times in general are probably only really held back by the lack of support players, and merging normal draft with flex queue doesn't necessarily fix that problem, but Riot is sort of trying to address that issue in different areas as well. Overall though, it does seem like normal draft is, it's definitely a valuable game mode to have. It's awesome for practicing new champions, getting warmed up for a ranked game, or even just a way to keep playing in a similar queue if you've got like ladder anxiety. It's like a more casual way to still play in a ranked format, maybe after like a loss streak or something like that, or maybe you just enjoy normal draft. I definitely play normal draft quite a lot, I do have to admit. It's also worth asking the question of whether it's actually okay to treat regions differently due to the player-based differences. We've seen Riot kind of going this direction in terms of the LCS, where NA is competing with the best of 3 format, while EU has the best of 2, meaning in EU some of the games were ties. And essentially what that meant was that NA are getting a lot more practice at a pro level outside of scrims, and this is an advantage that the Koreans had going into the international tournaments for quite a while, so it's a little surprising that Riot would keep using a system like that, since it definitely does favor teams that get to play more games. Now, that example isn't necessarily true for normal draft. People in different regions likely aren't going to be better because they can still play normal draft, but it's pretty interesting that Riot are taking down normal draft in some regions but not others because the player base isn't big enough, when at the same time they're always reassuring the League community the player base is still growing, guys. I mean, we're in season 7 now, and League has apparently, according to Riot's statistics, been growing non-stop. They recently announced 100 million active players monthly. If that's the case though, why would Riot need to start removing queues in order to keep queue times down? You'd think with like such a massive player base like League of Legends, they would fairly easily be able to support having a few different options like normal draft, blind pick, flex queue, and solo queue without having to remove any of them. It's possible that some people could end up getting frustrated, maybe they can't play the game the same way in each region. Region hopping to play with your friends isn't actually that rare of an occurrence, but as long as the game mode changes are only limited to the unranked queues, I guess it's not necessarily that big of a deal, at least on paper. I mean, I'm just not sure what normal draft is even like in those regions. I play on North America, so I can't really say. I've never really felt like there was an issue with normal draft. I've always felt like the queue times were, fairly normal, just regular old queue times, nothing out of the ordinary or anything like that. So maybe some of you guys who are playing on the smaller servers could maybe give your opinions or something like that, but for the most part it seemed really rare that you'd ever wait more than a few minutes for a normal draft game. Definitely nothing more than you would for a ranked or a blind pick game. So as a queue that provided generally higher quality games than blind queue, it's kind of unexpected to see Riot removing it, honestly. If you ask most normal draft players about wait times, I put my money that they're probably not going to be complaining about 10-minute waits if it guarantees that they're not going to have to play an unbalanced or poor quality game in general for the next 45 minutes. People who play normal draft aren't even that concerned about the queue times, I would argue. The players that want to play normal games that are concerned about the queue times, the time it takes to load into the game, are the players that are playing blind pick in the first place, right? But at the same time, it does get to a point where it can be a little bit ridiculous. If the queue times are over 10 minutes on the servers like EUNE, then it's definitely not that unreasonable to remove it, to be honest. But forcing players into blind queue definitely has its drawbacks as well. I mean, blind pick does have a larger population across all servers when compared to normal draft for sure. It definitely encapsulates what players enjoy about casual League a lot better. It's really quick to load up into the game. It's a lot less serious thanks to the lack of bans and the ability to have mirror matchups. It does have a lot of drawbacks that you don't necessarily encounter as much with normal draft though. You got like your insta lockers, the roll calling, lack of the way to deal with maybe a super OP champion. It's breaking the meta game or something like that. But in a normal draft, you get a lot of control over your team composition, your role as well. You can counterpick and give yourself more of a chance before the game begins or something like that. Ban the OP champions. But if you're in blind pick and you just happen to get up against an enemy composition, well, you don't really have any way to plan for it, honestly. You could end up just getting totally outpicked and standing no chance, and that can potentially add in some sort of randomness factor. It's almost can potentially be like a coin flip deciding the game whether you're going to enjoy the next 40 minutes of your League of Legends or not. And this is something that Riot, I'm sure they're aware of. The amount of toxicity that comes out of the blind pick queue is actually quite insane, and since it's the first impression of League that a lot of new players get, it's surprising they wouldn't want to put more focus on maybe teaching people about picks and bans and the ranked experience in general with normal draft rather than just letting them loose in blind pick and hoping that they happen to stick around. All in all though, it's definitely fair to say that you're more likely to have a bad experience in a blind pick game than you would in a normal draft game, just because there's so many factors in normal draft that help remove toxicity to some extent. So as a company that definitely wants people playing ranked, it's surprising that they would remove the higher quality mode of gameplay. At the end of the day, Riot does need to appeal to its player base though, and most players simply play blind pick over normal. You know, a new normal game mode that combines blind pick and normal draft might not actually be that bad of an idea, to be honest, if you think about it. If it combines the best things from normal draft and the best things from blind pick. You know, you go blind pick because you want like a fast queue, a fast game time to load up. You go normal draft because you want a higher quality game, combine those things, and you get like a slightly faster, maybe just better quality games in general, while also including that role selector that you get from ranked, or like the old team builder or something like that. And you might just end up with a single unranked game mode for Summoner's Rift that overall is just a lot better for everyone. That being said though, any trolls that lurk in one of the queue modes is of course forced into one place, so no matter how the queue system's designed, you can always count on players finding a way to ruin the fun. Now the likely result of this probably isn't that the players on the servers without normal draft are going to start playing blind pick instead. You know, instead it's probably going to mean that those players are going to play flex queue instead to get that similar experience. Now some players don't necessarily enjoy the competitive nature of ranked. You know, you got the ladder anxiety, the bad experiences. It's just some people just don't have fun in that sort of high pressure environment. And for those players, it really is a big bummer to disable normal draft and for them to lose that. So for those players, it's potentially possible that that kind of thing might make some players quit League entirely, actually. You know, different people definitely find different things that they like about a game like League, and both the blind pick and ranked queues do have issues that don't appeal to that specific niche group of players that do enjoy the normal draft queue. So it's definitely a little bit tricky to see. I mean, I guess we'll see how it plays out and stuff. I'm definitely interested to see how it's gonna respond in terms of the community feedback, if, you know, Riot's gonna decide a month from now that they want to keep it, or maybe re-implement normal draft or do something like that. You know, there's definitely a lot of options. It does seem like this is something that they're kind of trying. The big real question that's very uncertain is like, is this actually going to improve the queues of blind pick and flex queue respectively? Because there's not a lot of evidence that it actually will, since queue times in flex queue are generally just held back by the fact that nobody plays support, and queue times in blind pick don't really matter because, well, it's blind pick, so whether you have 5 people playing the game or 5 million people playing the game, you know, in theory it would still take you kind of the same amount of time, because all you need is just your opponents, really. You don't actually need certain roles or anything like that. But I mean, we'll see how it plays out. It's definitely a very interesting decision, something that I definitely did not expect, and it's actually potentially very risky as well. So, you know, I guess I'm just interested to see how it's going to play out. Either way though, that's just about going to wrap up everything we know about Riot's decision to disable normal draft. It's definitely still limited to the smaller populated servers for now. To be honest though, it's probably only a matter of time until they start moving towards their ultimate goal of just one unified, unranked 5v5 game mode queue for all servers. But we'll talk about that when it looks like it's going to happen. Either way though, it looks like that's going to be it from me today. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.